The relationship that needs to be there doesn't come naturally because there's an enemy at work. In the midst of being married, it's necessity to prioritize marriage above all other things. Almost everyone in every marriage at some point will have divorce pop into their heads.
Welcome to the Grace Marriage Podcast. I'm Brad Rhoads.
And I'm Marilyn Rhoads. We're here to help you build a marriage that's stronger, more connected, and full of grace.
I'm Rick Dayton, joining Brad and Marilyn as we bring you weekly conversations designed to inspire and equip you to live intentionally in your marriage.
We'll share practical tips, powerful stories, and strategies to help you and your spouse grow closer and thrive together.
So whether you're just starting out or have been married for years, there's always room to grow. Let's do this together. This is the Grace Marriage Podcast.
Welcome to the Grace Marriage Podcast. This is Brad Rhoads, and I have the privilege of having a ministry partner, really good friend, somebody that's really encouraged and helped us in Grace Marriage. I can say without question we wouldn't be where we are in serving churches and marriages at Grace Marriage without Rick Howerton. Welcome to the show, Rick.
Man, Brett, it's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, Rick's been in, how many decades have you been in ministry, Rick?
50 years. I started when I was 17.
50 years. Now, in your observation, just in ministry, and it's crossed a lot. You've worked for publishers, you've worked for churches, you've worked for the Baptist Convention, you've worked a lot of different places. Just tell us some of the things God's shown you as it relates to marriage and some of the pitfalls people fall into.
Yeah, I think that let me dive down a lane and see if I can get where we need to go. I think what God has shown me most about marriage is that it is not something, the relationship that needs to be there doesn't come naturally because there's an enemy at work. If he can break up a marriage, he can break up a household. If he can break up a household, he can create generations of dark legacy. It's something that demands work and a strategic plan. And that's one reason I love Grace Marriage. I think also I would say that in the midst of being married, it's necessity to prioritize marriage above all other things. And when it comes to relationship, you need to make sure the relationship with your spouse is one where your goal is to meet their need rather than for them to meet your needs. I think that's extravagantly important. And then I think I would also lean into the fact that almost everyone in every marriage at some point will have divorce pop into their heads. And so they need to establish long before it does that I will never bring that from my head to my lips. Because if you never discuss the possibility, it can never become a reality. My wife and I, we got engaged in a real unusual manner. We weren't dating at the time. I felt led to leave a concert at the little college we attended because I was so distraught that we were no longer dating. She had broken up with me and said the relationship was over. And I just went out maybe in my immaturity, perhaps in my spiritual maturity. I'm not sure. I roamed about a mile from the campus. We were going to Campbellsville College in Campbellsville, Kentucky. Went out in the country and laid down under a tree and said, I've got to have relief. I got to have closure. I'm going to lay here till the sun rises. If she shows up, I'll just ask her to marry me. And she showed up. And the first words from my lips, would you be a pastor's wife? And she said, yes. Then I thought, I wonder if she knows I'm talking about me. And so I said, would you be my wife? And she said, yes, that's what God wants. That's what we're going to do that. And we were supposed to never even see each other again. The first conversation we had as we walked away from being under that tree was, we will never, ever say the word divorce to each other. And so for 48 years, we've had our ups and downs. She's had more downs than I have because I'm a downer sometimes. But we've never, ever looked at each other and said, do you think we ought to consider leaving this relationship?
And you know, the interesting thing too, Rick, I know you've shared about maybe not prioritizing the marriage, her being in despair, a lot of different things. You know, your son, Josh Howerton's lead pastor of Lake Point Church. I'm sure you're very proud. A church of how many thousand?
On a given weekend, in-person attendees are 25 to 30,000.
So, question: if you and Julie had taken a different path and she got in despair, went another way, and got divorced, what do you think the likelihood of Josh leading Lake Point Church would be?
Very minimal. From what my lifetime experience, there has never been a divorce where there were children involved that their lives weren't affected emotionally, spiritually, and sometimes physically. And people who say differently, they're listening to the wrong people, because that's reality. Now, I want to say this about my son also, because some pastors may be listening and some of them may know him. He's very well known right now in church circles. He never, ever, ever misses a date night. Never. No matter what. If we normally babysit that night, that's going to happen no matter what. As you might imagine, he gets calls. I bet he gets 100 calls a year. I could be wrong, to do keynote speaking at some conference or event. He told me last year, I'm not doing any, because that's my time with my wife and my kids. He could be building this amazing platform for himself, but I'm proud to say his primary platform is in his own house.
Mm-hmm. And I think, to your point, there's always a temptation to put something ahead of marriage other than Jesus. And unless we fight that temptation, we're not gonna have a good marriage. It could be ministry, it could be business, it could be a lot of different things, but it has to be a decision. I remember my uncle, who I love and I've alluded to, a lawyer, kind of showed him, I have to work 65 hours a week. And he said, well, you got two choices. One, figure out a way to get it down, or two, quit being a lawyer.
Yeah.
He said,
yes,
because you can't sacrifice and kill your family and say that this is just what's required. It's not good for you. It's not good for your spouse. It's not good for your family. And I think sometimes people just have gotten into a norm that they don't feel they can get out, and they need to counsel with people to help them get out of it.
Yeah, and Brad, you mentioned ministry. I think one of the great mistakes we make as we have conversations about marriage and strengthening your marriage and ministry is we only talk about church staff members and pastors. The truth is, you can have so many responsibilities in your local church as a volunteer that your marriage breaks down. And we forget to talk about this. But, I have known multiple people in churches who were so revered by the staff, they gave them multiple leadership positions, or they needed them. I've got to have you at this retreat or whatever. And they ended up divorced. And when you sat down with them, some of them would be honest enough to kind of get in your face and say, well, Pastor, it's partially your fault. I didn't have time with my wife because I was an elder and I oversaw the greeting team and I was responsible for this and that and the other. And I was doing 20 hours a week on top of my regular job. And I felt like I was doing kingdom work. And every time that would be stated to me, and instantly what would go through my mind is, that can be a pastor or that can be a layperson.
And I find oftentimes the most talented people have the worst marriages. And let me explain why. Talented people get asked to do a lot of stuff. And it feels good to get affirmed. Hey, great job. Man, that was a great speech. Oh, wow, that really helped us. But it pulls them away from the family. And successful entrepreneurs typically have very poor marriages. There was a professor at Harvard that wrote an article lamenting that like 80 to 90% of his students were divorced. And they asked him why. He said, because they're such good producers and so talented. When they have discretionary time, they go put it toward creating that stuff, and they don't go toward the relationships, and their relationships aren't invested and they fall apart. So we got to be really careful with opportunity and recognize that opportunity may be the opportunity to kill your marriage, not the opportunity to advance you.
Yeah, and if I could speak to the pastors for just a moment, pastors, you need to be willing to say to the person who's come to you and saying, I'd like to be involved in that. You need to say to them, I don't want you involved in that. How much time are you spending with your wife?
Yeah, that's shepherding.
Yeah, that's shepherding. That's my responsibility as a shepherd, is to strengthen your marriage and strengthen your walk with Christ and strengthen your relationship to the church. And by the way, volunteers who have these incredible gifts, but they have too many responsibilities, don't do any of them very well. no matter how gifted they are. They need one or two roles in the local church to do things extremely well.
And
So it's a lose-lose.
I was told by my mentor, it's like, Brad, you have 5 young kids at the time. He said, you don't have time to spend a lot of time serving your local church, period. There'll be a different season. Right now, I was doing a recovering addicts ministry, did it for Sunday night for years. Loved it. Loved the people, saw change. My mentor said, I said, what I need to do? He said, first thing you do is you go to that meeting and tell you're not going to do their group anymore. I said, I've done it 6 years. He goes, no. Marilyn's put the kids down by herself for 6 straight years by herself while you've been at an office. And that's going to change immediately.
That is so good.
That's what he told me.
So
He goes, that's going to, there may be a season you can do that, but stop. And I remember one time I got a request to be at like a deacon's appreciation dinner on a Tuesday night. It's like, I was an elder at the time and I was supposed to be there. And I just emailed, I said, I'm going to be unable to attend. The response was, it's 6 weeks from now to Tuesday. Why can't you attend? And I responded, in 6 weeks, it's likely I'll still have a wife and 5 children.
That's so good.
And I love the quote that, you can be liked ball or respected ball.
Yeah.
You can't have both.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But it is tough though, because we're not in a culture, Rick, that really kind of pushes people to say no to other things in favor of your spouse. That's one of the reasons Grace Marriage exists. We want to be that peer pressure for you. We want to be that, hey, say no to this, say yes to your spouse. You'll be more fruitful and you have a more fruitful ministry.
Yes, for sure. For sure.
What do you think? Because the church and people, I think they have a pretty good understanding. Christ and the church, husband and wife, marriage be held honor among all. I mean, intellectually, people believe marriage is important. Why do you think it is, Rick, that that's the case, but folks don't typically invest strategically in their marriage and don't encourage others to do the same?
Yeah, I believe deeply that one of the greatest, the reason I think that is so prevalent is because it is not something in our culture that has been promoted. Also, because our parents didn't model that. People do what they've seen done, not what they've been told they're supposed to do. So they need good models. Also, pastors don't model it oftentimes. Pastors often take great pride in the amount of work that they do. So there has to be a cultural shift. And I believe, and you've said this to me multiple times, churches have to have a culture shift for their congregation to realize the importance of marriage. Not just a sermon on marriage or a series on marriage. Rather, there has to be a culture shift. And a culture shift only takes place in the culture if there are values that are being raised up consistently and are being embedded in the heart. So we just don't have a culture. And you said it earlier in the podcast. The culture doesn't promote marriage as being of ultimate importance. In fact, everything we see in media, and I'm that guy that just beats up on media. How often do you see even a commercial where there's a husband and wife? Much less a healthy husband and wife. How often in film do you see a healthy marriage? It's normally a marriage that's falling apart. How often in film do you now see a man and a woman who are together and living together who are married? I mean, everything around us in culture is creating a mindset of marriage is not important, which means the church has to be the place where marriage is lifted high as being of deep importance, with Christ and his church being of ultimate importance. But we need a cultural shift in our churches. And you've said it so well, Brad. In meeting you and hearing you so often, how is it that we don't have a minister for marriage? Because it makes every other ministry substantial. Our kids are better in kids ministry. Our students are better in student ministry. But if a marriage is falling apart or the home is experiencing this darkness that nobody knows about, everything else begins to tumble.
Yeah, and it's interesting. One of my board members who you've met recently, Rick, said marriage will never be more important in the home than it is in the church. And until the church makes a big deal of marriage in the church, nobody's going to make it. People aren't going to make a big deal of it in the home. And in irony, I see is one of the big complaints I hear from pastors is the child-centered society we're now in. So many people are missing church because of youth sports and baseball tournaments and softball and dance. But if you look at the church, do they have a full-time children's minister? Do they have a
Yeah.
full-time youth minister? Do they have a marriage pastor? No. So it's the church can be part of the answer by making marriage primary. And if you ask a pastor what has a bigger impact on a child's spirituality, the health of the marriage that raises them, or the weekly programming at the church, 10 out of 10 pastors are going to say the health of the marriage raising them. So then when I ask pastors, then why don't you have a ministry helping the parents be married well that are raising them? And to pastors' credit, they're responding and saying we should, and now they're doing it. So I do see the church have an amazing opportunity and really creating a culture shift, being the salt and light, and changing the way things are done. So I'm really excited about what can be ahead. But I would ask a question for somebody that's been in ministry 50 years. Why do you think the church has evolved such that children's ministries and youth ministries are in virtually every evangelical church, with full-time people leading each? But 72% of churches have no substantive marriage ministry, according to Barna Communio. Why do you think that's the case?
Okay, I want to preface this with my own cynicism. So let's just, this is this is an opinion. And it comes, I'm a church growth guy. I mean, one of the books I've written is a church growth book. But I sincerely believe that it's because a marriage ministry does not grow the church numerically. When people bring their kids to the Sunday morning experience or the weekend experience where their kids are in a kids ministry, if the kids come out going, I loved it, they're coming back to that church. If their student goes to the student ministry and comes home and says, that was amazing, I love this church, that's the church they're going to choose. Marriage doesn't do that. Although it will grow a church, people just don't realize it, because when you have happy, healthy people, you have a joyful culture, and a joyful culture is a draw for a first-time attender or anybody who's been in the church for decades. When you have people's marriages are falling apart or they're unhappy in their marriage, they bring that discontent into the church body, and people attend the church and think, "Oh, this isn't a very joyful place. I'm not going to be back here." So I know that sounds very cynical. I know it does, but pastors are under the gun to grow their churches numerically. There's normally somebody looking at those numbers and saying, I just don't think that pastor's getting the job done because we're not growing numerically. I know it sounds very cynical. It's just one man's opinion.
Well, one author said, how we ever reduce church to how many people we can get to come watch a speaker, I will never know.
I think he's dead on. And here's the deal. So my other passion is discipleship and groups. If you make disciples, and that's part of making a great disciple is to helping them have a great marriage. If you make disciples, you'll have a growing church, because mature disciples evangelize. Mm-hmm. That means they're either verbally sharing the gospel or they're bringing their friends to church who aren't believers. Mm-hmm. So I've said to a few pastors that are planning a church, hey man, go down the discipleship pathway. You can't go wrong. It'll take more time to disciple a few who disciple a few who disciple a few who disciple a few. But in the other end of that, you have exponential growth, and it's lasting growth, because their deal is not to find a church that, just does what they want done and has the programs they want. They're coming to your church because there's depth there in the people that they're around.
Yeah. One of my favorite churches that Grace Marriage gets a privilege of working with, their lead pastor told me that, if our marriages don't work, nothing we do as a church works. And then he also said, hey, Brad, I'm going to play the long game.
That's great.
He said, I'm going to play the long game. He said, I'm not just going to try to create just pure surface attraction. Now, don't hear me wrong. My kids are in youth ministry, children ministry. I'm for it. It's just, I think a marriage ministry, if you made healthy, vibrant, romantic, fun marriages normative, it would quadruple the effectiveness of every children youth ministry out there.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Let me clean something up in case I left the wrong impression. Do I think student ministry and kids ministry is vital to the growth of kids and students? Undoubtedly. It's huge. It's vitally important. My point was we prioritize student ministry and kids ministry rather than marriage, because the numbers do come into play in the minds and hearts of some pastors.
And that has the collateral damage we don't realize, because when the church prioritizes youth ministry and children's ministry over marriage, guess what's happened in the home? Children and youth get prioritized over marriage. And then guess what happened? Marriage doesn't thrive.
Well,
You know,
that's good. That's really good.
so it's not an intended consequence, but it's a consequence, because I believe the church is that influential. I believe the church that's important. And when the church does have children and youth ministries and no marriage ministry, it does send a message to the home that you need to put your children and your youth ahead of your marriage.
But Brad, let me ask you a question, and I know I'm putting you on the spot on this one for sure. When I think about marriages, I don't think of a ministry. Well, let me tell you what I mean by this. In church life, there are some things that should, the umbrella should be, everything else should be under that umbrella.
Mhm.
So, as you described to me, the importance of marriage for kids ministry, student ministry, counseling ministry, all those kinds of things, I believe that marriage ministry should be ingrained in the church, in church life, like we talk about discipleship being ingrained.
Mhm.
It's not just another ministry of the church, it is what the church is about.
Yeah,
And so it becomes ingrained in all parts of the culture rather than just having having it silo. So silos would be, we got a marriage ministry, a student ministry, a kids ministry, a missions ministry. We have these silos. You do your thing, I'll do my thing. It's my perspective that marriage should be engaged in all of those areas and emphasized in the church whole.
I agree. Like we tell churches regularly, healthy marriage needs to be part of the DNA of your church. I mean, because you could argue that the whole Bible is a story of a wedding, husband, wife, Christ in the church, love your spouse. How? As Christ loved the church. I mean, theologically, there's few things richer than marriage. In marriage right now, if it's complacent and it's stagnant, it's not neutral, it's harmful, because it's designed to be a magnet to draw people to the gospel. And if you say Christ is this powerful, but it does not even appear to have transformed your number one relationship, what does that say to the power of Jesus? So really one of the primary manifestations of your walk with Jesus should be an attractional, beautiful, sacrificial, grace-filled, invested marriage that stands out like the light in the darkness that the world looks at and say, whoa, that looks weird. And by God's kindness, that's how I got into marriage ministry. I mean, we would youth ministry 10 years, and the youth started asking us into premarital, and we said, why? They said, we want what you have. That looks fun. That looks like fun. So basically, most opportunities I've had in ministry have been a result of what people observed in my marriage.
That's fantastic. So here's a question I'd bring to you, because if I'm a pastor listening, having consulted all these years, Rick, don't tell me what needs to be. Tell me how to make that a reality.
Okay.
How do you guys through Grace Marriage help a church become a church where marriage is part of the DNA? What direction do you give the church leadership?
We equip a church to message a proactive investment growth perspective as opposed to a prescriptive crisis response method. Because like in our church, when I got to it, our marriage ministry was, we'll do premarital counseling. If you ever hate each other in an affair or toxic and you need help, call us and we'll try to help you. I mean, the only thing we didn't serve in marriage ministry was the marriage itself. But I kind of realized that a proactive discipleship. So what we do is we make it normative in the church to invest in marriage because marriage is important, not to invest in marriage because your marriage is a mess.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. And then we come in and provide everything a church needs to brand under their name and their ministry to have an amazing ongoing marriage ministry that they build year after year.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I would say to any pastor that's listening, and as I say this, I've not modeled this. I've never been in church that's modeled this. So I don't want to mislead you and make you think, oh, he has history here. But having helped churches become who they're striving to become, we will often create a series of terms. It could be connect, grow, serve, go, or whatever. Connect means be in a group. Grow means connect, come to worship. Grow means be in a group. Go means be evangelistic and something else. You know what's missing in those churches, and I hope the pastors listening will consider this. You need one of those terms. You need a new term that describes what it means to be in a healthy marriage.
yeah, amen.
Make it that important.
Yeah, it's an opportunity because it literally the church has an opportunity to affect generational change and to become part of a major marriage movement. And just to encourage you, one of the leading marriage leaders told me, Brad, I believe we're on the cusp of a major marital renaissance. Our younger people are longing for something deeper and more meaningful than what's been offered lately. And they're moving toward marriage, getting excited toward marriage, and the church had better be ready for it to teach them to do it well so it works. So I'm excited about it. If you are, we just want to really encourage you to invest in your marriage. If you're in a church that has Grace Marriage, get involved. If you're doing Grace Marriage, don't miss your sessions. Don't schedule over your marriage. And if you're in a church that doesn't have a marriage ministry, get them to gracemarriage.com. Rick, thank you so much for being on the podcast, and thanks for being a good friend.
It's been a great honor. Thanks, Brad.
God bless. Thank you for joining us on the Grace Marriage Podcast. We really hope you're feeling inspired to take intentional steps to grow in your marriage.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with a friend. Your support helps us spread the message of grace and reach even more couples.
And if you have a moment, please leave us a review. Your feedback means a lot to us and helps others discover the podcast.
To learn more about how you can grow in your marriage, visit us at gracemarriage.com. Keep building stronger, grace-filled marriages.
We'll see you next week on the Grace Marriage Podcast. Until then, keep growing in grace.